Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Sam. I've spoke a lot on this channel about my experience with maladaptive daydreaming, about how I've struggled with it for about 30 years. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I first found that term and started to do a lot of research and a lot of questions and Google search about it, find out about it. And what I wanted to do today, which I thought would be helpful, is just to go through 20 of the most commonly asked or commonly searched questions about maladaptive daydreaming. So this video could be like a one-stop shop, kind of touching on all the different concerns people have when they first come about that term and start to realise what it is that they've been doing. I think there is, a lot of mixed information out there. So I just want to go through like what I've learned over the past years. I've spoke to therapists, spoke to psychiatrists, spoke to quite a lot of people now who've struggled with this, and I just wanted to go through these questions and hopefully something that you're interested in will come up. So the most commonly asked questions, I've gathered them all together, 20 of them. What is maladaptive daydreaming? So maladaptive daydreaming is a condition where you have really intense, immersive daydreamings, and it can feel very compulsive and it will interfere with your daily life. The reason it's called maladaptive is because of that interference with your daily life. If you're just daydreaming and it's not impacting you at all, it's not considered to be maladaptive. So the idea of it being maladaptive is that it does interrupt your daily life. And I think, to be honest, if you start searching about daydreams and the impact of daydreams, then probably what you're doing is maladaptive daydreaming, because no one else who's daydreaming in a normal way or who's daydreaming isn't disturbing them would start to research this. I think it's really specific to people who realise that they've got a problem with daydreaming or that daydreaming is impacting their lives. Number 2, how is it different from typical daydreaming or mind wandering? So maladaptive daydreaming kind of involves longer, compulsive storylines, and it's got like quite vivid detail, and you can kind of go back into the same storyline for years. Particularly the way I used to do it, I would usually get something I was fixated on for a few years, and I would have storylines to do with that, and I could just like go into them all the time, and it would be very compulsive. So in the morning when I woke up, they would come back. I would struggle to sleep because it was so much. So this is difficult from typical daydreaming, which is going to be more linked to your normal life. So I think normal daydreaming would be like, an event's coming up and you kind of daydream about conversations that you're going to have, or, you'll think about things that you're maybe going to do, but they're quite fleeting. They're more linked to your real life. You don't feel constantly pulled in by them. I think people who maladaptive daydream can also experience just normal daydreaming when they're feeling a little bit healthier. And, you can tell the difference. Like you're not feeling pulled into a storyline in the way you are with maladaptive daydreaming, like as though you need to be daydreaming. And mind wandering is probably what like the majority of people do. Like you're just, you think of something and you'll let it run in your mind, like, what am I having for dinner? Like anytime I suppose you're not exactly connected to what you're doing in the real world, I suppose could be called mind wandering. Like when you're one place but your mind is thinking about maybe, what's happening next week or what's happening that evening. I think that would be considered mind wandering. So what causes maladaptive daydreaming? A lot of times it seems to be caused by trauma, by stress, by other mental health issues, by depression, loneliness. There does seem to be a lot of different things that cause maladaptive daydreaming, and people haven't really been able to pinpoint exactly what causes it. When I first started researching maladaptive daydreaming, it did seem like everybody had trauma or had traumatic upbringing. So that's where I was really confused about it. I was like, oh no, like I'm sure I've got this, but I don't have trauma. Like I didn't have a traumatic childhood. And that's where it's important to kind of, really understand yourself and like what's happening when you're not maladaptive daydreaming, because I would become very depressed. And after speaking to a psychiatrist, I've been diagnosed with OCD, so that kind of explains the maladaptive daydreaming in my life and why it's happened for me. But for other people it could be linked to another mental health problem. So the important thing I think is that you find out, what are you maladaptive daydreaming to get away from. If you've got trauma in your childhood, I think that would probably explain it. If you're got a lot of stress, loneliness, depression, again, that might explain it for you, but I do always recommend that everybody gets their own professional help to understand exactly why they're maladaptive daydreaming, because if you stop maladaptive daydreaming, you're going to be left with something, and it's like, what are you going to be left with, and who's going to help you with that? So it's not just often a case of like, oh, I just want to stop maladaptive daydreaming and I'll just be bored if I don't do it. It's sometimes a lot deeper than that. Is it a recognised mental disorder? So no, it's not considered a mental disorder by itself. I think that's because it's really linked to a lot of other mental disorders. So it's not considered to be a mental disorder by itself, and we need to remember that it's actually a very new thing. It was just the term maladaptive daydream was just coined in 2002, so before that it was never even considered like its own condition or its own like phenomenon. So at least like there is that, but it does seem to be linked with so many other things. I suppose I can understand like maybe why they don't consider that to be the problem by itself, because when people stop maladaptive daydreaming, there's something else to be dealt with, and that could then help the maladaptive daydreaming. Number 5, what are the symptoms of maladaptive daydreaming? So the symptoms would be getting invested in daydreams so much that they impact your life. They'll feel compulsive. It'll feel like an addiction. It'll feel like something you can't stop. Now, physical aspects, when I was younger, I used to pace all the time, and pacing seems to be a really common thing. If you're not able to pace, then you might feel quite restrained in your body, and like little gestures might be coming out of you. You might kind of be almost half acting out conversations. Like you might do repetitive movements, you might need to hold something or just kind of like rock. I think, the way I would describe it sometimes, like you've got stories or conversations bursting to get out of you, and that does impact your body, and like you're kind of doing things that are involuntary sometimes. So yeah, I think a lot of physical movement is a symptom of maladaptive daydreaming. So how is it diagnosed? There is no official diagnosis. There is something called the Maladaptive Daydreaming Scale, but that tends to be used by professionals. And I think, maladaptive daydreaming, I think, is something, you could diagnose yourself really as yourself, because it's not something that has a wide range of symptoms. It's not like something like ADHD, where a lot of symptoms might actually make sense to people who don't have ADHD. And so, you really need to be seen by a professional and make sure that all these symptoms make sense to give that diagnosis. Maladaptive daydreaming is truly about daydreaming intensely that's impacting your life, and when you read about it or when you first hear about it, it's probably more likely going to be like a aha moment, like immediately. I think like for things like ADHD and maybe even OCD, like you probably will need to like read quite a lot and be like, oh, I've got this, I don't have that doesn't happen, and be a little bit more confused about it. I think maladaptive daydream's a bit more straightforward, and if you feel you've got maladaptive daydreaming, you probably are struggling with maladaptive daydreaming. Number 7, who is affected by maladaptive daydreaming? So the results here say that it's most common in young adults, and it does seem to be like that's where it starts. Like it started for me when I was about 12. It does seem to start in childhood for people, but it will then continue on. But most people do say like it started quite young for them, and that's probably related to something happening like in those teenage years that maybe sparks something off. And then the other people affected are people who struggle with anxiety, depression, trauma, ADHD or OCD. Number 8, how common is it? So the estimates of studies suggest that it's maybe around 2 to 4% of people that would experience maladaptive daydreaming. But again, there's not been a whole load of research done on it. It is still relatively new, but that is the estimate that's out there. Number 9, is it linked to OCD or ADHD? Yes, it will very commonly overlap with those illnesses as well as depression and anxiety. Number 10, can trauma trigger maladaptive daydreaming? Yes, it may be used as a coping mechanism from trauma or from childhood stress. But again, if you don't have trauma, that doesn't mean you don't have maladaptive daydreaming. Is maladaptive daydreaming obsessive or addictive? Some researchers would consider it to be a behavioural addiction due to the compulsive nature of it. It also can become OCD compulsion to people with OCD, and that, in my case, that is the situation. It does feel like an addiction. That's why it's very hard to understand. And obviously, like, people who don't have maladaptive daydreaming can't imagine being addicted to daydreaming. So that's why, if you struggle with being addicted to daydreaming, you're struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, and it's really like nothing to be ashamed of. Like, it is an addiction, it is a compulsion, it is something that's very, very difficult to stop. Number 12, what impact does maladaptive daydreaming have on daily life? So for most people, it really disrupts sleep because it can be most intense at night. So your sleep is disrupted, and then the next day, because you haven't slept, your defences are down, so you're still maladaptive daydreaming and not able to control it. A lot of times it will impact your social interactions, and because it impacts your social interactions, you don't want to be social, and then it will cause emotional distress and loneliness. For me as well, I kind of realised it was actually like eating away at my confidence, because you spend so much time like not connected to your real self and not connected to the real world and what's going on around you. And especially if you're daydreaming, you're not yourself, then obviously that's going to erode your confidence, because you're not spending time with yourself, like in your head as yourself, like you're escaping all the time. So it does, it really does impact your confidence. And the big problem is, in order to daydream, you would rather be alone, but because you constantly want to be alone, then you start to struggle with loneliness. So it really does, impact your life a lot. So if daydreaming has impacted your life like this, then you are struggling with maladaptive daydreaming. How can maladaptive daydreaming be managed or treated? So because it's not considered a disorder by itself, there's no specific treatment, but people have found like therapies like CBT or DBT or mindfulness will work, and also lifestyle adjustments can help, like just somehow making your sleep habits healthier, your eating habits healthier. If you feel like a healthier person, then you're going to have less stress, less anxiety, and that might lessen the daydreams. However, it will really depend on what you're daydreaming for, and is it part of a mental illness, or are you doing it out of habit? Are you doing it because you're lonely? Like, you really need to start to understand, and this is why therapy can be useful for it, or at least speaking to someone to really understand, like, is it something you can stop yourself, or is it something that you're going to need help for? The number 14, are there medications for maladaptive daydreaming? So there's no medication specifically for maladaptive daydreaming, but because it is linked to so many other conditions, the medication you'll take for those conditions should have an impact on the maladaptive daydreaming. So in my case, I've got OCD and I'm taking medication for that, and it's really, really cut down on the daydreaming. It really has really positively impacted me, but I have read a lot of other people who've tried to take medication and it doesn't help maladaptive daydreaming. So again, it really will depend on your particular case. Like, it might be that medication isn't the answer. If you're maladaptive daydreaming because of trauma, it may be that you need therapy and to deal with that trauma in order to stop the maladaptive daydreaming. So again, everything's very specific, but in my case, medication has really helped, and it's been the only thing that has genuinely helped for a long period of time. At different times I have been able to stop it through various ways for short periods of time, but this has been like the one thing that has really helped me, and the one thing that I think, I actually needed this, and I never would have thought that medication would have helped. So that's why it's really important to, really try to understand yourself and what you're daydreaming for, and you can get like the best treatment specifically for you. So number 15, can maladaptive daydreaming be prevented? It can't specifically be prevented, but things like managing your stress, improving your sleep, and just having some support and someone to speak to, I think is really helpful. I think like the thing about maladaptive daydreaming is because it's embarrassing, and like nobody who doesn't suffer with this has ever thought about it or would understand it. Like, it can just feel so isolating. It is such an isolating problem. You're never just going to randomly bump into somebody who's going to tell you that they have an addiction to daydreaming. Therefore, you'll feel very out of sync with the rest of society. And I think, that's why therapy is helpful because you can just like actually not feel so alone and get that out. So yeah, there's no really way to prevent it or to stop it fully, but there are ways that you can control it and manage it and just find out what's going to be the best way for you. Number 16, can maladaptive daydreaming include characters from existing stories or universe? This is very common in maladaptive daydreaming. People will use characters from TV shows, from movies, celebrities. A lot of these things are like major triggers for people who struggle with maladaptive daydreaming. So that's very normal. Like you can maladaptive daydreaming as yourself with different characters, or you could be maladaptive daydreaming as another character. And number 17, can daydreaming as fictional characters instead of oneself still count as maladaptive daydreaming? Like absolutely, that's really, really common. It's funny, I used to always think if I was maladaptive daydreaming as myself, I was going through a better time than I was if I was maladaptive daydreaming as other characters. I think that makes sense because it's kind of like, oh, I must have like some self-esteem if I like want to picture myself in certain situations, and then a lot of times it's not myself, and that's when I feel like, oh, I want to get completely away from myself. So I used to like, that used to be an indicator to me of like actually how I was feeling, not consciously, to be honest. In fact, probably it's retrospective. 18, is it still maladaptive daydreaming if daydreaming doesn't negatively affect daily life? So I did make a video about like, can you enjoy maladaptive daydreaming? And for me, this is super interesting because obviously when you're young and you start maladaptive daydreaming, it is enjoyable. I used to love just like pacing down my room. I used to think it was amazing. I could get into this really vivid, immersive situation. Now, the reason people don't enjoy things, or the reason things become shameful and difficult, is because there's some sort of friction with the outside world. Like you shouldn't be doing this. Like nobody else is doing this. So therefore, the shame and the embarrassment of doing it overshadows any enjoyment you could have been having from it. And also, obviously, if you start this when you're young, you've got like no responsibilities. So me doing this in my room all the time, it didn't actually matter. But as you get older and you're supposed to face life, you're supposed to be like building relationships and things like that, as you realize like you're not able to do these things, then again, it just erodes your self-esteem and your confidence, and in that way it's going to impact your life. So you obviously could be in a situation where nothing is expected of you, where you have no shame, you are not embarrassed, like you're quite happy to just sort of daydream constantly, and like nothing from the outside world is impacting that. Then of course, like you could enjoy maladaptive daydreaming, and it's called maladaptive because it is negatively affecting you. But the thing is, like, you could be doing the same thing as what a person who maladaptive daydream is doing, but because it's not impacting you in any way in your life, then you wouldn't refer to it as maladaptive. And I think the other term that people use is like immersive daydreaming, which is fine. So yeah, it's not maladaptive if it's not negative to you, but that doesn't mean that you are not doing just what like a maladaptive daydreamer would do. I mean, it's kind of, I don't think it's really the best term for what we do anyway, but it just is what it is. Number 19, can pacing, facial expressions or repetitive movements without conscious control indicate maladaptive daydreaming? I think like pacing and the facial expression, repetitive movement, I think that was what naturally I wanted to do. I think that was my natural compulsion, and I suppressed that when I realised like how embarrassing it was and how embarrassing it would be if I was caught. And by suppressing that, I became very depressed. You don't want to be caught, you don't want to be embarrassed, so a lot of times you're going to control all that, and then by controlling all of that, you almost kind of make yourself a bit nauseous, like you're not able to get those stories out, or not able to do things in your body that you want to be doing. So I do think like all this stuff is actually like a natural part of maladaptive daydreaming. But I have read people who don't do these things, and like people who just want to like lie down and can do it like lie down. I don't think if you don't pace and don't have facial expressions, etc., that means you're not maladaptive daydreaming, because I kind of curbed all those basically. Well, curbed them in some places, and other times like they do kind of get out a little bit, but they will indicate that you are maladaptive daydreaming. But again, you could maladaptive daydream without doing these things. Number 20, last question. Is it still maladaptive daydream if it fluctuates in frequency as mental health improves? So yes, I have gone through periods in my life where I realised I was not maladaptive daydreaming, and when I think back to it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because actually I was quite confident and quite happy around that time, like in my real life. Like, I never understood all these links. I would actually just be like, oh right, wow, I'm not like doing that thing that I normally do. Like that's all. I didn't have a name for it. I just kind of had this feeling like that I was feeling quite healthy in my mind, and I didn't really relate it to the fact that what was going on around me, I was quite confident. I was in a kind of confident situation. So I think it really does fluctuate. It really is very much linked to, I think, stress and loneliness and depression and, you know, different things. Like I have had times where, you know, I've managed to kind of get away and feel okay about it, and then it'll just come back, and it'll come back really strong. So yes, I think it really does fluctuate throughout your life, like depending on what you're going through at the time. And as well, you know, if it is linked to OCD is an anxiety disorder, which means, you know, if you are feeling very calm and very confident, it's maybe not going to impact you as much. And then when you are going through really difficult times, that's when it's going to be even more intense. I mean, I remember, like, if I'm going through a very difficult time, like the maladaptive daydream, it just became really loud and intense and really, really difficult and unpleasant. So it really does fluctuate in, you know, frequency and in intensity. So just because you go through some times where you're not doing it, it doesn't mean like you're not struggling with that. It might be a struggle that's always going to, you know, come back for you. So yeah, that's where I just think you really owe it to yourself to find out as much as you can about, you know, why you need to maladaptive daydream, why it's happening for you, like what is your underlying issue. I think that's so important. You know, if that's the one thing I could say to people is like really try and get professional help to find out, you know, what is your problem. And because somebody says they were able to deal with it one particular way, and then if you're not able to deal with it that way, it doesn't mean like there's something wrong with you. It just means like you're doing it for a different reason, and like the solution for you might be different from the solution for somebody else. So those are the 20 most frequently asked questions about maladaptive daydreaming. I kind of quick fired through them. I just wanted to make kind of one-stop shop for people to kind of go through these questions. These were all the kind of questions I would have Googled around that time. So I hope this answered a lot of questions that you might have, and if there's anything specific that came up here that you want me to do a specific video on, then please do let me know. And please do like and subscribe if you can, to allow other people to find this video. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.